Hello, so I'm going to share my screen so I can start my presentation. Bear with me while I figure out the technological little stuff. So hopefully you can see my screen now. I'm thinking you can. Make sure. Okay, should be screen sharing by now. So basically, um, my presentation is going to be on how Buddhism can help improve sports performance and reduce anxiety. So I want to discuss a little bit on the reason why I picked this topic specifically. And it's because of my own background as a competitive level 10 gymnast. So I spent about 9 years in the sport. And I trained approximately 37 hours a week, if not more. And when you train that much, you are doing a veritable amount of repetitions of skills and routines. And so when you step up to the competition, block or the beam, the bars, whatever event you're performing on, the expectation is to step up there knowing that you can do each move flawlessly because you've done it so many times and the muscle memory is there. But the problem is that if you experience anxiety as an athlete, and performance anxiety, specifically nerves, or you just succumb to the pressure of doing well from not only parents, coaches, but also yourself, you can step up there and forget every routine that you've ever done, every injury you've ever had, and and push through to be there in that moment. So I wanted to talk about that. And the reason why I have both sports performance and anxiety linked here is that I really think there's a true correlation between anxiety and sports performance. These are intersectional things, and exploring the intersectionality of them is something that I think is really, really important, because not only as an athlete did I succumb to the pressure of doing well in this great desire to do well, but I also experienced a lot of anxiety and mental turmoil every time I had to compete, which was something that was very tough to digest, because gymnastics was a sport that I truly loved and truly found so much joy in doing since I was 8 years old. So basically, I want to give this presentation to kind of help anybody out there who may struggle with sports performance or even anxiety just as a whole. And anytime they have to step up to take an exam or go to an interview, I hope that perhaps some of the principles here may help someone. And I just think it's a really, really interesting topic to explore. So yeah, that's my little introduction here. So I'd like to move on and go on to the history of Buddhism. So the history of Buddhism, I'd like to go in a little depth here just to set the foundation for Buddhism in this presentation. So it was founded by Siddhartha Gautama nearly 2,500 years ago. It has its origins in India. And basically, so Siddhartha Gautama, went on to become known as what we call the Buddha today. He was actually born a prince. He was born to a very affluent family, and his father sheltered him from all the hardships of the world and gave him every luxury and sensory pleasure that he could have ever desired. So one day, curious, Siddhartha left the palace with his chariot driver. And he stopped for a moment, very troubled by the sight of an old, wizened man. So he asked his chariot driver what is going on with this person. And Chindaka, his chariot driver, was forced to explain the principles of old age to Siddhartha, who had never known what old age was. And so this was first of the sites that began to really sit heavy in the Bodhisattva's stomach, that he too would succumb to old age and his body would deteriorate. And so that was really tough for him. He went on to see the three other sites, the next of which was sickness, which took the form of a very sick man. And Siddhartha too had never before seen sickness and known all the sufferings of the world. So this troubled him even more to be confronted with the reality of how much suffering there is tied to the human experience. So the third of the sights that the Buddha saw that troubled him even more was death. So he thought there was a parade going on because there's so many people, and he actually was forced to ask Chandaka, who explained that it wasn't a parade and that the people's morose faces were actually there because somebody had died. And so this troubled the Buddha even more, so that the fourth sight he saw, the sight of a mendicant, a monk meditating under a tree, was something that he really aspired to. He was so inspired by this monk under the tree who achieved such a state of calm and complete contentment, despite knowing the suffering of life, that the Buddha made it his intention and goal to achieve that kind of peace and achieve enlightenment, essentially. So that's a little history of Buddhism. I'd like to go on and move on to the Four Noble Truths, which are extremely important principles to Buddhism. And before I may discuss how the principles and practices of Buddhism can be applied to sports performance, enhancing sports performance and reducing anxiety and managing other mental health disorders that may occur, I want to discuss these a little bit. So the first I have listed here is acknowledging the presence of suffering. Now, this essentially, the first noble truth here is accepting that suffering is an integral part of the human experience. There is no escaping from suffering except for through samsara. But acknowledging that, suffering is just part of the human condition, and accepting that brings a sense of peace in itself. So next is determining the cause of suffering. So for Buddhists, one of the main causes of suffering is desire. So desire for material things, desire for approval from other people can be listed under this. And specifically bringing it back to the topic of this presentation, a lot of athletes struggle with anxiety and performance anxiety because of their desire to do well. If they had no desire to do well, then they wouldn't suffer and they probably would perform better. And I know that was extremely true for me in my own experience, was that my desire to do well, my desire to get a college scholarship and perform at my highest potential was so great that every competition, my sense of calm crumbled because this desire was overriding every sense of peace and contentment in the present moment that I had. So the third truth is the truth of the end of suffering. So knowing that there is an end of suffering, and that is through following, the principles of Buddhism, like meditation and mindfulness. And the last and fourth of the noble truths is discovering what the method is for achieving nirvana through the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path is essentially a blueprint for how one may achieve nirvana. And so knowing that one can achieve nirvana and escape samsara is something that's very important to Buddhists. However, if you're just an athlete looking to enhance your performance, or a regular human who struggles with anxiety, knowing that you can apply principles that help you achieve a transcendent sense of calm that can essentially transcend above whatever mental inner turmoil you're going through, knowing that you have tools to manage, the suffering of this human experience is something that's, invaluable. So next of the on my slide, I'd like to discuss and touch on the Eightfold Path itself. So first we have right understanding. So right understanding is essentially understanding the importance of the Eightfold Path. Moving on to right thought. right thought, I find, is extremely important to the topic of this presentation because our mental dialogue, our internal dialogue is intrinsic to the experiences we inhabit, what we tell ourselves, the thoughts we think, the thoughts we give energy to are extremely important. So I noticed as an athlete, I was probably giving about 87% of my thoughts to negative, doubtful thoughts, that I couldn't do it, that I wasn't good enough, thoughts of worthlessness that, spun around in my stomach and made me feel physically ill sometimes. And, our thoughts in one respect can mean nothing, but in another, what we give thought to is what we give energy to. Our thoughts influence our emotions, and our emotions influence our decisions. So right thought is essentially, cultivating and thoughts that are good and that are not self-berating. And so the third of the next limb I'll discuss is right speech. So basically, this limb of the Eightfold Path is not lying to others. When we lie to others, it kind of makes us hold a sense of a stain in our stomach, and it just doesn't make us feel good. And even lying to yourself can be highly detrimental. So the next one I'll discuss is right action. And right action is essentially abstaining from killing, stealing, cheating. When we abstain from these acts, we are able to go to sleep at night better. That is the best analogy I can have for it in a more modern sense of stating this limb of the Eightfold Path. A lot of people will, when they say that they feel like they've wronged someone or said something hurtful, they will discuss how they can't sleep at night. So I like to think of this limb of the Eightfold Path as, things you don't do so that you can sleep at night, knowing that you've done your best as a human being not to hurt others and cause suffering to other beings on this planet. So the next is right livelihood. And that's basically developing a livelihood, making a living without breaching these precepts. So if you wanted to make a livelihood on the black market, selling kidneys or livers, that would breach right action, because generally selling kidneys is not a very nice thing to do. Basically, so the next one I have is right effort. So right effort is developing good qualities as we move forward in life. And I see this as trying to improve yourself every day and knowing that there's always room for improvement. A way to cultivate this is by listening to podcasts that are educational versus maybe playing too many violent video games. Of course, there's balance, but right effort, really just working on yourself. And I think this is something that is really important and applicable to reducing anxiety, because it is something that when you know that you're taking the steps forward in your life and consciously, when you are nourishing your body with good foods, and when you are taking walks outside and taking the steps needed to dedicate to yourself and to remind yourself that you are worth your time and worth all of that value, you can find a greater sense of peace. So the next one I have is right mindfulness. This is extremely important in many aspects, whatever it is you do, whether you're an athlete, a business person. When you cultivate right mindfulness, you are able to cultivate a sense of being able to be in the present moment. And that's a quality that a lot of people struggle with. Life in the Western world moves extremely fast, and there's not a lot of space to be in the moment. Even with phones and technology, you'll walk into a space and people have their noses buried in their phones, and it's very hard to be mindful and notice that the trees that are around you, the smell of pine in the air, the feeling and warmth of the sun on your skin, being mindful of every experience you're going through, every thought that's going on in your mind, every sound that's entering your peripheral field is really important. And this can further tie into right concentration. So when we have right concentration, We can cultivate this by the breath and by using a mantra. So when we tune into this sense of inner peace and inner focus, we are able to find a sense of calm that is transcendent to other forms of preparation we can take. Essentially, as an athlete, you can do the routines as many times as you want, and you can practice as hard as you can and train as hard as you can, build the physical strength and physical fortitude to get through it all, and know that you have the capabilities to do something, at least from a physical standpoint. But by developing right concentration, you're able to focus in on the moment when you need to put these tools, these physiological tools you've cultivated, to the test and actually use them. So next, I'd like to discuss a little bit the practices, or some of the practices that are helpful. So here I have meditation, mindfulness, releasing attachments, living compassionately, and self-kindness. So the two most important of these, I'd say, in relation to helping enhance sports performance, are meditation and mindfulness. So meditation essentially is taking a moment to sit, walk. There's many different types of meditation, which I will discuss further on in this presentation. But essentially, it's taking a moment to go inward, to connect with your breath, and to find an inner stillness within you. And alongside meditation that can be very helpful is mindfulness. And being mindful can be something that can be brought into every aspect of your life. Being mindful of the foods you put in your body, whether they're high vibrational foods, being mindful of the words you speak to others, being mindful of the words you speak to yourself, being mindful of and just aware of your internal dialogue, as aforementioned, can be extremely important. And knowing, even knowing the moments when you have previously experienced senses of anxiety, and when you feel pressured, bringing awareness to these is how we can kind of overcome that. So as an athlete, if I had been able to apply these principles, and if I had known them sooner, and known that, okay, every time before I am about to go on and the judge raises her hand and I'm about to perform a routine, I feel a sense of anxiety. So if I had become aware of the sense of anxiety, where it sat in my stomach, how it made my heartbeat feel, I might have better been able to manage it. Because when we bring awareness to things, it releases a sense of lack of control that really spirals us into a very anxious and stressed out state. So furthermore, I have releasing attachments listed here. So I find this to correlate with the way we attach to outcomes and future outcomes in life. So our desire to do well, our desire to stick the skill, our desire to win the game, our desire for other people to like us, that comes up in social anxiety. I, feel that sometimes the desire to please others, even whether it's in the workplace or within friend groups or when you're meeting new people, we have all of these desires to be presented in a certain way, to be seen in a certain light, that causes so much suffering. And that by releasing these attachments, we're able to find a sense of calm and peace and actually be more authentically ourselves, and more authentically in a space of calm and serenity. So I also have living compassionately. When we live compassionately and we give out good, loving energy to others, and also when we really see the light in everyone that walks among us, we're able to find a sense of, it makes us feel really good. And there is a sense of selfishness, and I don't mean that in a negative connotation whatsoever, but there is a sense of selfishness and living compassionately, because when you're compassionate to others, it makes us feel really, really good inside. And I just find this really, really important here, because when you're in a highly competitive space and environment, such as, sports or whatever it is you may be in, maybe it's at a job, we tend to see everyone as the enemy. We see ourselves as us, and then there's a them. And when there's that divide, there's a sense of discontent, and it feels very out of alignment for us. So when we are living in a state of seeing everyone as competition, we feel a sense of anxiety that feels very unnatural to humans, because humans are naturally very social creatures. And it is not, it does not feel good to see others as competition. Some people thrive off of this. However, from my own experience, when I saw everyone as a competition, I did worse. I forgot everything that I practiced in the gym, despite the 40 hours, the full-time job I spent amidst the chalk and doing routines over and over again. So by living compassionately, seeing the light in others, seeing that the value in others that is does not take away from your own value as a person, as an athlete, as a person in academia, as a whatever it may be. That's something that is very, very helpful, calms the mind, and brings a sense of connection with humanity that is intrinsically calming. Self-kindness also ties into our inner dialogue, the story we have with ourselves. Self-kindness, I find, is a principle and practice that is quite difficult. It sounds easy, but sometimes being nice to yourself, not being hard on yourself, seems counterintuitive to a lot of messages that society infiltrates our minds with at young ages. That be hard on yourself, work harder, push through injuries, all of this. A lot of athletes themselves, a big paradigm in sports culture, especially in sports like gymnastics and dance, is that you can push through injuries. So basically you'd have an injury and you'd tell your coach, and your coach would tell you, oh, it's not that bad. And an experience I would feel personally is I would question myself, and I would berate myself for being too soft, for not being tough enough, because the pain would get to a point that was so hard that I physically couldn't push through it at some points. So at this point, I would be taught to be cruel to myself and have very, very negative thoughts about myself for not being good enough. And so by practicing self-kindness, not only can this help aid in performance, but this can aid in, the healing, because all of that time I spent being cruel to myself and practicing negative thoughts, I ended up coming back from injuries way too early. And when that happened, I ended up having chronic injuries that still bother me to this day. And when I went to perform, I obviously couldn't perform as well, because I was dealing with injuries from years back that never fully healed, because I didn't know what self-kindness was, and that, it would have been okay for me to take time off and to be kind to myself as I was healing. So that's something that's really, really important, and I think should be introduced into a lot of athletic spaces. So next, I'd like to discuss a little bit on the science of meditation. So to go through this briefly, it can decrease activity in the default mode network of the brain. So this is kind of what fosters mind wandering in the ego. It also, there's studies from Yale University that meditation can be just as effective as antidepressants on patients with not only just depression, but also with anxiety. So a study from Sarah Levin in 2011 from Harvard University actually proved that meditation increased cortical thickness in the hippocampus while decreasing brain cell volume in the amygdala. So why this is important is because the hippocampus is the center of concentration and how we regulate our emotions, how we self-regulate ourselves. So in a lot of stressful and challenging environments that are in challenging situations that are presented to athletes at competitions or games, being able to regulate one's emotions and learn how to respond to situations instead of reacting to them is extremely important. We also have decreasing brain cell volume in the amygdala, and the amygdala is our control center of fear, stress, anxiety. So that is obviously something that is extremely helpful here. So I'd like to touch on some tangible examples of how some Buddhist principles and practices, specifically Zen Buddhist principles and practices, have helped some athletes. So we have Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. Both of these amazing basketball players were obviously born with an incredible store of talent and worked very hard to be the athletes that they were. Now, what I'd like to say, though, is that Buddhism was actually something that really helped them take their careers to the next level. And Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant also said that in an interview with Oprah that he practices meditation 10 to 15 minutes a day, and it's what truly helps him prime him for the day. And so that's something that's really interesting because despite being reluctant to practice Buddhism at first, it ended up being such an integral part of his day-to-day. And I think that's something really important for people to see who might be skeptical of practicing Buddhism while being faithful to another religious system, and knowing that you can practice Buddhism and that it's separation from being dogmatic and, having a deity, something that can be, really cool. So I'd just like to play a little video from Kobe Bryant here, where he speaks about the power of sleep and meditation.
So our guest teacher is somebody that I'm so excited is going to teach you about sleep and meditation because he's so unexpected. It's Kobe Bryant. And you may say, why Kobe? Well, it's Kobe because when I first met him, we talked a lot about sleep and meditation. And he told me how he used to sleep for 3 or 4 hours. And then he realized that in fact, sleep and meditation are performance enhancers. And he would do anything to be his best at the game. And far from what our culture makes us believe, that there is actually a trade-off between sleep, meditation, and productivity and performance, there isn't. And Kobe proves that.
Let's get to it. Lesson 1, get an additional 30 minutes of sleep a night. Take it as a challenge. Try to find that space, quiet your mind, and get your 30 minutes of sleep. And you'll see it makes a really, really big difference. My sleep habits were horrendous, to say the least. I mean, I've always had a hard time sleeping. I couldn't figure out how to shut my brain off. So what made the light bulb come on is that I went out there and played a game, and I played like crap. I was like, why am I playing like crap? Because I've been practicing these same moves over and over and over. But yet, I couldn't execute them properly. I was feeling sluggish. I was feeling lethargic. And I knew it wasn't because of my training, because I had trained obsessively. So then I started looking at other things. And that's when I came to the realization that, hey, Cole, you're not 21 years old anymore, buddy. Like, maybe the fact that you're sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night, maybe that has something to do with the fact that you're playing like crap. And that's when I started really evaluating those things. And I'd say lesson 2 would be just 5 minutes of quiet time, 5 minutes for you to be mindful and to just sit and find that inner voice and just kind of listen to the self. And preferably would be in the morning as you start your day. I meditate every day. And I do it in the mornings, and I do it for about 10 to 15 minutes. And I think it's important because it sets me up for the rest of the day. It helps me. It's like having an anchor. It's if I don't do it, I feel like I'm constantly chasing the day, as opposed to being able to be controlled and dictate the day. Not that you're calling the shots on what comes forward, but the fact that I am set and ready for whatever may come my way. I have a calmness about whatever comes my way and a poise. And that comes from starting the morning off with meditation. for me, it's really just listening to my inner self. That's basically it. Like you sit in silence and you just allow these thoughts to come forward, and you get a chance to observe the self and things that may be lying beneath the surface that if you don't have that time to sit quietly on your own, you'll never pay attention to. Because if you think about it, like, the reality is we're paying attention to so many things that are going on around us. We're constantly taking selfies, we're constantly taking pictures to post on Instagram and all these other things, and we're constantly observing everything that's around us, but we don't take the time to really observe what's going on inside of ourselves. And that's what meditation is for me. In 2000, we had a new head coach that came to the Los Angeles Lakers by name.
So I'm going to stop it right there. So something that, oops, trying to play again. So something that Kobe Bryant discussed was that implementing meditation in his mornings was very helpful in priming his day and creating an anchor for him. And I find that's something that's very true to my own experience, and something that athletes will that would be very valuable to athletes is meditating in the mornings, maybe before they attend practice or school or whatever it is they do, and incorporating whether it is just, sitting down and focusing softly on a spot on the ground and tapping into their breath, listening to the inner dialogue going on, not judging it or trying to change it, and just taking that moment to be extremely present can prime them so that, like Kobe Bryant stated, he isn't dictating the experiences that are happening in his life, but he's also bringing a sense of control to him so that he can respond to these situations, not react to them, but respond to them. So basically in the mornings can be a very good time to implement these meditation practices, but also night times can be good before you go to sleep, because meditation is known to aid in sleep. So next, I wanted to bring up some specific Buddhist meditations for anxiety. And when I say anxiety, this can be any kind of maybe social anxiety. Maybe this is just chronic anxiety that you wake up in the mornings with. I've experienced that. Or this could be specifically performance-related anxiety. So any of these practices will truly, truly, truly help. So samatha and vipassana meditation are both forms of Theravada Buddhism. So those are both meditations that come from the oldest original form division school of Buddhism. So samatha meditation focuses on thoughtful breathing. So this is basically slowing the heart rate and just really tapping into the sensation of the breath as it passes in and out. This is something I cue a lot in my yoga classes, and something that Kobe Bryant actually and other athletes have discussed, that really just tapping into your breath, taking a deep breath before a tough experience, before you feel like reacting to something instead of responding. That's the moment that can help you cool yourself down, slow the heartbeat, tap into the parasympathetic nervous system. So Vipassana meditation, which is another form of Theravada Buddhism, it's observing the thoughts and emotions. So this is mindfulness, essentially. It's observing, maybe closing your eyes, bringing a hand to the stomach and noticing if you have a sensation of uneasiness there, if you have a tightness in your chest, just bringing awareness to all of that. I'd also like to discuss Brahmya Vihara. I may be explaining or pronouncing this wrong, but in that type of meditation, there's 4 different kinds. There's loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. So this is a kind of Zen Buddhism, and it starts with loving kindness, which is a meditation that can be practiced by repeating mantras to mentally deliver loving energy to others. And so this may seem a strange meditation to discuss when discussing sports, enhancing sports performance, but I truly think that when we live more compassionate and loving and, spread kindness out to others, we're able to embody a higher version, a higher self, our highest potential. And that's ultimately what enhances every action, decision that we take in this life. So by, meditating and sending loving kindness out to others, that's something that can be really helpful. Another thing is compassion. So compassion meditations are basically imagine suffering, someone that is suffering, and imagining relieving that suffering, helping them. It's something that's really beautiful, and it's something that you can maybe even ask other people to practice for you. So, an athlete who may be struggling with, performance anxiety could ask their friend to meditate and give them a compassion, meditation. And knowing this presence of love and support from others is something that is invaluable. There's also empathetic joy meditations. So empathetic joy meditation just involves rejoicing in all the good that others do. So you could sit there, and if you're working on enhancing your sports performance anxiety, you can sit in a seated posture, maybe you're walking, however you would like to take your meditation or mindful practice, and just think of something that is intrinsically really good that other people do. Maybe it's a charity that you know of. Maybe you have a friend who did something very compassionate and helpful for you. It's something that can bring a sense of joy and gratitude. And when we are operating from a sense of joy and gratitude, we are better in every experience that we have once more. And then there's an equanimity meditation. So that's finding balance between pleasure and pain. It's reducing turmoil, and it's not escaping from the pain and pleasure. It's just learning to find a sense of balance. Like if you have a seesaw and, there's pain on one side and pleasure, and it's always constantly teetering. I tend to be someone who experiences emotions very viscerally. And so my teeter-totter can be very, very up and down. So by practicing meditation, I'm able to equalize that and even it out more or less. And that's something, so athletes and, highly competitive environments with the lights and everything can really be very stimulating experiences that are hard to work through. So by practicing equanimity meditations, they can reduce the kind of turmoil and find a sense of ease, not too much excitement, because sometimes I would get nervous, and a lot of athletes are so excited to perform all the skills they've been practicing so hard to show their family and friends and really achieve their highest potential to, do well for the college recruiter that's waiting in the stands and the sidelines. And something that can be extremely helpful is finding a sense of equanimity, balancing the sense of excitement, balancing the sense of fear, and all of the experiences and the influx of experiences one may be going through. And so those are some Buddhist meditations that can be invaluable for anxiety and performance anxiety, whatever anxiety breed resonates. So basically, that is my conclusion. I'd like to conclude this presentation, and I hope that the information I presented was helpful and clear and concise. And whether you experience anxiety as an athlete or have a friend who does, or maybe you just have generalized anxiety or social anxiety when you come into a room with new people, maybe you have that sense of, dis-ease rising in you, whatever it may be, practicing, principles of Buddhism like mindfulness, meditation, even just extending a loving, kind energy outward can instill a sense of confidence, calm, and serenity within you that is so helpful. And so meditation won't cure your anxiety, but it can help manage it and help you develop better focus and really just live a better experience in this life. And all of these Buddhist principles, they come from, Siddhartha Gautama and, all of the monks and the bodhisattvas that followed him afterward. And it's them we really have to thank for them, because, you know, the westernized versions of meditations and guided meditations we see can often feel disconnected from Buddhism and its roots. But just knowing where all of these practices come from, where the core of them is, and, you know, the simplicity and, you know, bringing them into your life and being able to bring them into your life alongside other values that you hold dear is something that's very fascinating and helpful to me. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and thank you for listening if you listened to this long talk of mine. There's my little works cited. So I'm gonna stop sharing now and pause the recording. Thank you.